So how's it going, Dave?
It's going well, thanks. Yourself?
Great. Glad to be here tonight. I've really enjoyed what I've heard so far.
Thank you, man.
So tell us how you got started out in music. I mean, I know you started playing piano when you were about 4 years old, and
Yeah.
it sort of went from there. But
Well, it's funny. I mean, music's a huge part has always been a huge part of my life. My dad's a writer. My family come from the East Coast, so my dad could attend the Writers Workshop, the graduate program in creative writing at the University of Iowa. So they came when I was about, an infant. I was a couple years old, and my brother was just starting kindergarten. My mom was working while my dad was in graduate school, and I spent a lot of time with him at home, and immediately, even from that point, the big old kind of bug ear headphones were my babysitter, and I would spend, by all accounts, 5 or 6 hours in the high chair, just strapped in, listening to records, the old turntable with a repeating arm, and I would listen to. It turns out now they're some of my favorite records, ironically, or not so much, depending on, I don't know what the neurobiological breakdown is of that, but I mean, Sticky Fingers and Exile on Main Street, Astro Weeks, the first 2 Springsteen records, old blues and country, all those things that have become the things that have most informed my vision as a songwriter, or my favorite musics to listen to, were records that I listened to in those couple of years. And then, so my family then moved, after my dad finished at the workshop, to a small town called Wellman, just south of Iowa City. And my mom's dad was a well-known jazz pianist from New York in the mid-30s through the mid-50s, who ended up, when rock and roll came around, it kind of put him out of business in terms of working in Manhattan, which is where he worked out of. He went back to Cape Cod, which was kind of his spiritual home. And his longtime friend and protege, Bobby Hackett, a great cornetist, had followed him to Cape Cod. So they did a lot of playing, and my grandfather continued to arrange for Hackett all through the 60s and 70s. So my mom sat me and my brother, there's the two of us, down at the piano when we were little. I was maybe even 3, and I could kind of play rudimentary piano even from that young age. So eventually there was some kind of aborted attempts at getting me lessons with different folks in Iowa City, which in the early and mid 70s was a real kind of wide open radical town. I think there was too much dope being consumed for anybody to teach anybody anything. But and finally, when I was about 8 years old, I settled in at the Prusel School of Music, which is a famous Suzuki method classical music school in Iowa City, one of the first in the country that taught that Japanese method. And I was not and am not a classical pianist, but that was the method that I studied, and I ended up doing that till I graduated from high school. And then I didn't touch the piano for about 4 years, all through college. Studied American Studies and English at the University of Iowa, a lot of literary history, and did an undergraduate honors thesis, history, a lot of music history as well. I was kind of a student of 20th century American pop culture. And for my first long-term relationship that I was in at that time ended, and I had a piano at the time where I was living, and I wrote a bunch of songs, and those were all the songs that wound up on the first record I made with a band that I helped form a few months later, called High and Lonesome. And the first record we made, which was called Lack a Day. So I never intended to have, certainly not a career in music. I didn't even know if I would do much playing of music ever again. I kind of burned out on the piano. Not that I was that diligent of a student that I could claim burnout, but I did anyway. So, and then High and Lonesome really was strong out of the gates, and I was making a living pretty much right away, and quit college with a semester to go, and it's 20 years later.
wow.
Yeah.
So with High and Lonesome, you guys were doing about 200 shows a year?
At least, yeah.
Really hitting it hard.
Yeah, I mean, when you threw in my solo gigs, that's what I would do. Those first years of High and Lonesome, over 200 a year. Although I did 200 last year for the first time in a long time. So I've always worked real hard. I've always felt like that's how you learn your craft, and I've always enjoyed I know I have friends that are songwriters and great musicians that don't enjoy performing as much, and vice versa. And I definitely enjoy that space. I enjoy the moment. I enjoy what happens in the moment when you're playing ensemble music with other people, where that improvisational kind of magic can happen.
Do you prefer that over being in the studio recording?
Yeah, the studio is a kind of a constant puzzle to me, and I've been fortunate to get to do a lot of producing of records for other artists and my own records. But yeah, I prefer the live medium over the studio. Although I consider them so entirely different that I don't know, it's almost apples and oranges. To me, a good analogy is the spoken word and the written word. Performing live is like speaking, so that it's not necessarily so much, what you're saying is important, but there's all these other ways to communicate that go into getting your vision across. And there's the visual aspect. There's all these things that can go into creating what you're creating. Whereas the studio is a document, and it's more about crafting this document that's going to live after. And I think a lot of the magic that happens in the moment can get lost, or doesn't translate always. And to me, that's I love the studio though too. And I love recording, but that's the trick of recording is chasing down that magic.
Mm-hmm. You've done quite a bit of producing, actually, haven't you?
Yeah, I have. Yeah. And I've loved it. To me, it's all learning. So I had, I made my first few records with Bo Ramsey, who is an accomplished producer, and I got to learn things about the craft that I liked and things that I didn't, and was able to take that into, and then I started Trailer Records in 1994, 95, and that allowed me to work in the role of producer more often with some young bands that I had met and who I really liked, and so and I got to do some stuff I'm real proud of, but I learned a lot. I think there's so much to be learned in the studio. Every time I go into the studio, I learn something new.
Yeah. Since I'm from Nashville, I have to ask you about a little bit about Nashville.
Yep.
Where exactly in your career did you end up in Nashville?
I went to Nashville in 1996, and what had happened was I had, 2 years into my career in 94, when High and Lonesome was really ascendant and looking like we were going to sign with a major label and crowds were getting bigger, they discovered a bunch of tumors in my larynx, what they now call pre-malignancies, that were basically becoming cancerous. I didn't need chemo and radiation, but it was very close. So they had to rebuild my vocal cords, my entire larynx, and I found myself, without this, this instrument that I had, this gift that I had discovered kind of later in life than maybe a lot of people do. And it just was coming back very slowly. I was doing a lot of physical therapy, and I had a show with a guy named Todd Snyder, who I still work with occasionally, and Todd offered me the job playing piano in his band. His career was taking off. So I took that job and went down there for a year, a little over a year.
Mm-hmm. So you're able to continue to play, but you didn't have the...
But I didn't have to carry the
didn't
shoulder
have to
the
do
burden.
the vocals.
Yeah. I didn't have to shoulder the burden of singing. High and Lonesome, and even in the band that I started in '98 after High and Lonesome, the Body Electric, that I've always been the only singer in the band. Some harmony singing maybe, but so that is, on the course of a 3-hour night, that's a lot of singing that gets done.
Yeah.
It allowed me to give my voice a chance to rest. And then when I came back after leaving Nashville, I made Uneasy Street, which is my second solo record, and probably the one that's done the best. And I would say my voice was at 60% then. And then a few years later, I did The Big Night. I'd say it was maybe 70%. I feel like now I'm making a record which should be out in the spring, and my voice is close to 100% for the first time since the surgery in '94.
And is that the one you're making with the Knitting Factory?
No, I had a distribution deal when I had Trailer Records that was with the Knitting Factory in New York. But no, I don't have any involvement with them anymore.
Okay.
They, obviously they're a venerable jazz institution, but they, the founder, Dorf, I forget his first name, Kendorf, something. He was a Midwesterner who had relocated to Manhattan. He lost control of the company that he had started, and so my distribution deal that I had with them went south upon that. The owning a record label is a real education in many ways that one can get hurt by the record business, and there are many. They are legion.
Yeah. So when can we look for this new album to be out?
I'm thinking the spring. Todd Snyder has just started a label himself and made an offer to put it out. Now, I don't know if that is what will end up happening, but it's real close to being done.
Okay.
Right now, I have a good friend in Nashville named Will Kimbrough, who played in Todd's band when I did, and now plays with Emmylou Harris and Ronnie Crowell, who just laid a bunch of guitars on the record, a bunch of string instruments, along with my regular guitar player in the Body Electric, Randy Davis.
So, how does your songwriting process work?
You know, I'm one of those guys, and I think there's a couple different kinds. There's the people who are more writerly, who sit down and craft out songs, and then, you know, I've read great interviews with Keith Richards where he talks about it, which is what he describes is real similar to my process, which is, you know, you kind of have the antenna up, and when something comes down, you're there to receive it. The work that you know, I'm most happy with, the work that I like the most, the songs come delivered pretty much of a piece. It doesn't require much crafting after the fact.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is, and you know, artistic inspiration, the muse is funny that way. But you know, my writing also tends to be real personal, so it tends to come from the stuff in my life, mostly. And so I went through a pretty rough time in the middle of this decade, and yeah, it's going to be documented in this new record. It is documented in this new record. Yeah.
I can't wait till it comes out.
Thanks, man. Yeah.
Well, before we wrap up, what final thoughts would you like to leave our viewers with?
You know, I think, you know, now, I mean, it's funny, I'm hitting middle age now. You know, I was a young guy, and all the relationships that I had with Bo Ramsey and Greg Brown, all these guys that were on the trailer records that I had. And, I was always the young guy, and now I'm getting to be a middle-aged guy myself, and about the same age as Bo was when I first started working with him, ironically. And it's funny, you know, it's caused me to, you know, kind of look back and reflect. Not a lot of people have a 20-year run in the independent music business, you know, being real indie musicians. And I really thought a lot about it. You know, I think being an Iowan, being from Iowa, and really rooting my career here has been a real wonderful thing. Iowans really appreciate the notion of being, the idea of being an artist as a vocation is not strange to Iowans. You know, if you work hard and, you know, and if you do the work, then anything is, you know, is all right for the most part. And yeah, I've really, this has been a real fertile place for me in terms of relationships and in terms of being able to be a working artist. And those are things that I've thought a lot about lately.
Okay. It's great. I really like the Iowa music scene.
It's really, I think surprisingly good. And, you know, Trailer, there was a point where in the early 2000s I was in Nashville a lot, and I would run into these industry lawyers, and they all knew Trailer Records. It had gotten this really kind of hip underground cachet. Europe, when I would tour there, they all knew it. And I think, yeah, it was surprisingly good. You know, Trailer was kind of one of the voices for the Iowa music scene for a long time. And yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate, but I just couldn't carry on any longer. It cost me too much, literally and metaphorically.
Yeah, well, but you did it for a long time, and it was
yeah.
a big success.
Yeah, well, thanks, man.
All right. Well, David, thanks so much for being on Insider
My
Sessions with
pleasure,
us
man.
tonight.
Thank you, man. Thanks for having me.